Hello and welcome to Pages of Godlight Podcast. I'm your host, Christine Whitaker. Have you ever seen how sunlight breaks through a patch of trees and creates a circle of brightness that seems almost otherworldly? C.S. Lewis described these as patches of Godlight. My hope is in this podcast, you too will stumble upon bright spots of words and carefully delivered messages that open you up to experiencing the light that is all around us and waiting to be found. Welcome to another episode of Pages of Godlight. I'm here with Phil Smouse, the incredibly gifted, talented, creative author and artist, illustrator of Pilgrim's Progress, Illustrated Adventure for Kids. Phil, this book is pretty cool.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And Pilgrim's Progress, I think most Christians, most readers know about this book. In fact, some think it's the first English novel that was ever written, which is pretty crazy. And I know this has been maybe a year longer in the making, all the illustrations and time you put into this project. And I know people on the podcast, you can't see it, but you're going to need to check it out because the illustrations are amazing. But Phil, tell me, when you were presented with this idea of Pilgrim's Progress for Kids, sort of how your process was to create this project. Did you start with the illustrations? Did you start with the story? Did you start with a character? How did that work?
Sure. Well, someone that I know very well, who may actually be on the other side of this podcast, sort of floated the idea that had me thinking about it again. It's something that I thought about pretty much forever, and I was sort of familiar with the story, but a little bit afraid of it, so it had been on the back burner forever. But when you actually mentioned it, sort of a light went off, and I went back and started thinking through it, playing around with it. But the first place I started was basically getting the character of Christian, trying to figure out, who he was, getting that initial look. But again, going into the story, I was not completely familiar with this as I was with some other things that I've done. I did the Oswald Chambers book, My Utmost, and that I knew from reading for years and years and years. So I knew that pretty well. So this was a bit of unexplored territory. But basically, after getting the characters, I would just sort of go in and start writing a chapter at a time. We did the first chapter, basically. So I wrote the first chapter and went back, and I like to do like a line illustration, sort of like coloring book pictures first of everything. So I'll do all the line art. I actually did the entire book this way. All the line art all at once, the whole way through to the end. So I would write it a chapter at a time, then illustrate in coloring book fashion onto the next chapter. And again, I would just to sort of make sure I was getting everything completely accurate, or as accurate as I could to what Bunyan wrote, because, there's already a long line of people. I think when I walk into heaven, Oswald Chambers is going to be a lot of other people waiting with the bat going, "What did you do to my book?" And I don't want that to happen with this one, because he's been around a lot longer, and he might be more angry about it. I don't know. But, so I was staying sort of a chapter at least ahead. As I was writing one, I would just listen constantly over and over to the next one, because I really, my heart in this, my intention is not to interpret in any way, but to take that story. And I think the reason it's been around for so long is because it is so incredible. I mean, there's no other story like it.
Right.
And I think it's informed so many of the stories we love, like Lord of the Rings. Is it possible that, there's no way this story has not been read by authors like that C.S. Lewis, Tolkien. I mean, they had to and informed those stories. So, again, I was drawing all line art and sort of staying ahead. As I would illustrate, I would listen to the next chapter and then move on, write the next chapter. And begin to illustrate that chapter, listen to the next chapter as we would edit. And then once all of that line art was done, and we were pretty close to the deadline at this point, a few months away, I went back and did all of the color all at once, because it's just sort of a different mindset. And it's easier to sort of get on a roll with one thing because, our deadlines are kind of tight, and I wasn't in jail with a lot of time in my hands to just get it done.
Yes, so, good reference.
I would have been in jail, if I didn't get it done. But so that was the basic thing, and it's just sort of the way that I do it.
I'm sure with color too, you want to see how you're coloring it to make sure there's variance in character and page design to see that overall.
There's some thought chapter to chapter. We're coming into this part with Apollyon now, so but it's a bit more difficult for me for some reason. The writing and the drawing just kind of pop out.
Right.
And the color, once I get rolling, it'll come, but it's a little scarier for me for some reason. It takes me a little bit longer to get that part of it rolling. But,
that's major part of it too, right? I think maybe too, that means it's done. Well, when you've put the color on, it's like, okay, now I actually see this visually in a way that you don't see it before that's done, maybe.
Right, and that's where you have to be able to look at it then and go, okay, that's done. I'm moving on, and again, with a tight deadline, I think makes that a good thing, because you could play with something forever. I can never be a painter. I would never even finish one picture. I attempted to do a painting for my daughter recently. It was the most stressful thing I ever did in my entire life. It's like, can I just do a cartoon of your dog and the garden? It's like, but that's my process anyway.
Well, and I think also what's interesting about Pilgrim's Progress being an allegory, it's almost like now with illustrations, there's so many levels to reading this story, because, you can read it just at word level. It's Pilgrim on a journey, here's the story, right? But then the allegory part is every character is sort of this shaping of our character, or temptations or virtues that Christian comes across. And so even to visually make that is like, there's an added element of like, what does charity look like? What does, Mr. Worldly Wisdom, what does he look like? So to even have to think of that, of saying like, what's their facial feature? What are they holding? What's going to make this character trait come alive? I think about that, even why probably Pilgrim's Progress has been around as long as it has, is because Bunyan was incredibly creative in telling a Christian story and making us think about what, these people or things that come into our lives, how do we interact with them? What do they do to us? How do they affect his journey? And I know even as a kid reading some of it, like like an annotated version of it, I remember thinking, wow, he's stuck in the pit of despair. Like what would that look like in my mind? So it's such a visual story, even without illustrations. But then the added pressure to say, how do I make these characters look? And I think you did a wonderful job. I mean, you can see when you look at some of these characters, you just instantly know, oh yeah, this looks like legalism to me. This looks like, I thought you did an amazing job, but I'm sure that took a lot of thought and visualization of what, not only who they are, but how they interact in the story as well.
Yeah, and a little bit of that did happen sort of beforehand, as I would come from one chapter to the next. I'd know, okay, here are the characters, and I would do that first, or I would design all those people and sometimes try to get their colors set, because I knew they're going to be part of it. They're going to interact with Christian simple things. Should they be tall or shorter? What should they look like? But I mean, I do think from a standpoint of the text, the story to me it's just so incredible what, as you think about like the scope of your life as a believer, someone who's been saved for a while, you're unsafe, myself up to my 20s, and I'm in my 60s now, but so you have a lifetime of these experiences, and you see all these things in these characters, and I don't know that anybody else has sort of told our story as believers like that, the way that Bunyan did. And even like the thing about the cross, which it's something, of course, I've known forever, but the most amazing thing to me is I read it. It's like, Christian's got this burden. Evangelist directs him to the cross. He comes to the cross. He gets to the cross. Boom, the burden falls off. We move on. There's no drama. I mean, I feel like sometimes so much of what happens right now is focused on that drama of, we're going to get you saved. We're going to get you saved. We're going to get you saved. Hooray, you're saved, which is good. It needs to happen. It's like, okay, now get out of the way. There's somebody coming behind you. And then the poor person is like, but he has told that whole story. That first part was just sort of an aside. It's like, okay, you've come to the Lord.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Right.
And that's where really the excitement and all the issues sort of begin. And of course, a lot of things had to be cut from the book, but I think he has just covered every single thing that anyone could ever run into
and I think
as a believer.
Some people might think that's like how the story ends, with his burden dropping and then it's done, right? But that's not even like maybe halfway through the story. Then it's like, what is his progress beyond that? Like, what is he doing as a Christian then? And then what influences, how does he look at that? How does that shape his journey? Because they're still there. It's like, it doesn't mean he doesn't run into these characters, whether good or bad.
Well, sure. The first thing that happens is he runs into someone to basically test his faith. It's like, what? Don't tell us about that. Or, no, we don't, so the whole rest of the thing is him managing this life that he now has inside of him, along with everywhere that he's going and, the people that he meets. I just love Christian as a person. He's the Christian that I would want to be. If I could be the Christian that I would like to be, that person that wants to do the right thing, absolutely wants to do the right thing, is trying to do the right thing, doesn't always do the right thing, but is never really like, meh, he's 100% in,
Right.
When he meets Apollyon, he's not afraid. He's not, somewhere looking for comfort or, somewhere to get away. He's not trying to hide under a rock. He's like, okay, I know what the word says. I'm going to confront you. It doesn't initially go very well, and he does, everybody knows the story. He gets on the other side of that and is victorious, but he didn't shrink back from it.
Right.
He wasn't hiding. The word was in there. There were those challenges, but he kept going, and that, to me, I hope I can, be like that, And, of course, he had a bit of a problem at the end, but there was a friend there with him that could say, hey, and something happened the other day that had me thinking about that and how important friends are and what they add to us. And sometimes we don't see it right away until maybe we've walked beyond that point, and now you look back and go, oh, my gosh, those people did so much for me at this point. And I think that's what this book is. We walk through these steps with him, and we find the importance of the people that we're around and what Christ has put in them, and, how important it is to just stay on that narrow road, and how determined the enemy is to get us off of it, I don't know.
It's funny you say that, because I was just talking to a friend, and she just walked the Santiago, Camino de Santiago, the St. James Way in Spain. So it's a pilgrimage, right? And you walk miles. And she was telling me that she made all these friends along the way, because you would just go up to a stranger and talk to them. And I was like, how interesting, because you wouldn't do that in a restaurant. You wouldn't just go to a stranger. Right. But if you're doing the same thing, if you're on the same road, you're going, all those people are walking the same road as you. And how interesting that then you're much more open to talking and openings, and just that idea of friends that, Christians are walking the same road. And if we understood that, like, how much more we could be open to saying, like, what's your road like? How, how do I get through this next pass or whatever?
And sharing with you, because everyone he met said to him, and he himself, it's like, where have you come from? Where are you going? And now, again, because we were constrained by a certain number of pages, I wasn't able to do that every single time. But if you look, every new person he met, immediately when they met that person, they were, where did you come from? Where are you going? They wanted to know something about him. Tell me something about your journey. He would just continue to share. It just really struck me like, does anybody at this point ask you when you meet anybody, oh, where are you from?
Right.
Where are you going?
Yeah, true.
Maybe we're losing that. I don't know.
So tell me, when you were writing this for kids, like, I'm sure, that was a challenge too, like you said, to distill this into, translating, not losing the heart of the message, but translating it so that a kid could understand. And I think even just as a parent reading this to your kid, even some of the words for some of the virtues or for some of the temptations, a kid may not know these words, but you've done a wonderful job at, like, each chapter begins with character descriptions and sort of a roadmap of where you're going in the book. But I think for a parent, it's also, like, helpful to say, you may may not know this word, but this is what this means. And so maybe talk a little bit about that, and maybe like one of the characters that stood out to you of like, you know, how a parent could teach a kid about one of the virtues or one of the temptations, and like, and did you read this book as a kid, or did you encounter it later in life?
I'll start with the last question first.
Yes.
No, I did not read it as a kid. I was not a Christian as a kid.
Oh, right, you said,
right.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, I got saved in my 20s, so there was, you know, I was the furthest thing from it. So, you know, it sort of came to me as I came to know Christ, and then it
Right.
finds you like it finds all of us. But so as on, I guess I do, as far as like big words and things like that,
Yeah.
and words we maybe don't know, or words that maybe are a little over your reading level. The way, you know, we learn a new word is, you know, not to run away from that word, but to learn what it says.
Right.
So, and I think Bunyan uses a lot of words that if we don't continue to remember what they
Sure.
mean, we'll be lost and
Right.
replaced by simple words. And I, for one, am for knowing and learning and knowing those things. So I would rather take the time to take a word like whatever it is, even just like temptation, and, you know, but don't eliminate the word, explain it in a way
course.
that, you know, you can relate to it, you know, because you're going to come up against it. So that's a bit of a pet peeve for me. So the book doesn't, you know, completely smooth everything over. Hopefully it sounds a little bit like Bunyan still. You know, it uses the language as much as I could that he used, and it is his words, not my words. Like I said, I don't want to interpret, I don't want to put anything else in. I want to communicate this incredible story the way it was communicated. But so it will include some larger words that will be, you know, technically over your reading level, but
Yeah.
you're going to know at the end, oh, I know what that word means. I don't have to hide from that word. I don't have to hide from big words.
Yeah.
There's going to be a dragon down the road somewhere. I don't have to run away
Right.
from that dragon. We all have them. We've met them, you know. But the other thing that we find out is through Christ, you know, through that sword, you know, I'm here. The dragon is back there now,
Right.
and I'm still going. So onto a character. That's okay. You asked some really hard questions. Let's do that. Okay, well, I opened up to timorous and mistrust, okay? So Christian is on his way, okay, to the House Beautiful. He's about to meet the sisters, all right? So he's coming up the hill. Let's see. So when he gets up to the top of the hill, timorous and mistrust, they meet him there, and so they're afraid, okay?
Yeah.
And they've seen the lions ahead. They're scared. They're like, you know, there's lions down the road. Forget about it. We're
Yeah,
done. We're
right.
out of here. Okay. So again, I did not change Timorous's name to something else. Now, somewhere I know in this book, we're just looking at it, I did a definition, but basically, you know, it basically means to be afraid. You
Yeah.
know? So we left it in that way. So and you can learn that's what that means. But I mean, so you see these characters. Bunyan has named these characters by their character trait, which is
Right.
really great in some ways when you get to the part where he's on trial and you look at the names of these people. I mean, you think back, if you've heard about the trial that he had, you know, from
Right.
being in prison, and read about it and read his account of it, and then read this, it's like, oh my God, he is telling us in this book about the thing he went through
Yeah,
here. And it's,
right.
you know, I mean, it's one of my, okay, I'm getting away from your question.
No,
I
no,
know
it's okay.
I will. I go, if you give me a lot of slack, you know, Mr. Blind Man is the first person on the jury. So this is the person who wrote this book, you know. But so each one of these characters that you meet, they are, when you see Mr. Blind Man, you know that he is unable to see anything that's right in front of
Right.
him. Something can be happening that would be super obvious to me and you, but he either isn't going to see it, or doesn't want to see it, or refuses to see it, or
Right.
doesn't see it. And all of the characters in here, there are just so many things that you learn, you know, as a believer in this book like that. And I guess that really wasn't a super awesome answer to your question. Let's take help, okay? I see help on the cover. And again, I guess this goes back to the the value that just we have together, as friends, that personal connection, and not so much the digital connection that we have now, or that we're having today, and that we'll have with so many people today, but the kind of connection that we're having here at this table, and you and I know each other, some, and you and so many of the people in here were help to me when I needed help. So there was, not only do you learn what it is to help another person, a person that's willing to help, that sees a person that's having a problem, doesn't walk away, is willing to help, is willing to sort of walk with you to get you going again. And so you learn those things. He teaches you all of these things along the way, I don't know. I know that's probably not where you wanted to go, but
no. I think it's sort of interesting too. Often Bunyan uses two characters, and it gives you that nuance of just like you said, mistrust, and what was it?
Timorous.
Yeah. Like being afraid versus not trusting.
Right.
And he sort of pairs these to give us a more nuanced understanding of what these traits, how they're different, how they might sway you different ways, and how Christian has to navigate those. I think that's also interesting that it's not one, sometimes it's two characters. He seems to kind of do them in pairs or more than one. And I think that gives your mind a way to play off that it, even in life, we sometimes want to think it's one thing, but there's nuance to how temptation comes, or it might be multiple things that we're encountering. And I think Bunyan does such a complicated, beautiful job of and such an array, good and bad. I mean, it's not just the temptations, but, charity, patience. How do they give him the things, give them the things he needs as he moves forward. So it's also not this pit he's in. It's the ups and downs that every Christian goes through. And even when I've read a chapter about Bunyan and who he was, he seemed to sort of swing very strongly, I feel guilty, or have high highs in his faith. And I think that also probably lended to how imaginative he was on how that affected his own walk. And of course, being in prison, that idea of captivity, and you can see that theme through the book as well. And I think he clearly had that, in his mind when he was writing. But yeah, I think even that idea of progress is interesting. So talk a little bit about the journey that Christian takes, and and I think for a kid, and any novel, you have a character that's going, there's conflict and resolution, right? That's any story has that. But this is such a timeless truth of what that story is.
Well, sure. And I think at the basic level, of course, as we, when we meet Christ, our story here begins. But as everybody knows, or as maybe you don't, our story doesn't end here. We're here for a while, but it's not the end of the journey. We are on a journey, all of us together, to the celestial city, to life everlasting with Christ. And I think, again, he does such a brilliant job of taking you through each step, knowing that once the Lord comes into your heart, okay, this isn't the end, this is the start. And so now, where do I go? What's going to happen? So as you walk along, and even as we talk about, we mentioned timorous and mistrust before, things happen, and you're tempted to go, oh, okay, what do I do in this situation? I'm afraid. I'm just going to turn around, But the word, Christian, the word, says no. The Bible says this, thus saith the Lord, I'm going to take care of this thing. You can keep moving. And so I think his journey is constantly like ours, staying on that narrow path, meeting the things that come as they are, good and bad. And there's a lot of really good things, and there's some bad things too. And so he doesn't shy away from that. And the journey, spans all our life, a young person as into an older person. And those things don't stop. You don't hit a place where it's like, okay, well, I'm saved now. Everything is cool. No more problems.
Right.
It's going to be awesome,
Yeah.
And yes, it is. When you look in the rearview mirror, that is absolutely, at least for me, I can say, yeah. I heard a song the other day in church. They were singing, "He Has Good Plans." Jeremiah 29.
Yeah.
And I'm not one at this point in my life to get too emotional about things, but it was just crushing me when I think back. Oh, God, I'm going to do it again. Oh, crap. Over where we've been and all the good things that the Lord had done, and this book done here with what people don't know about this publishing house, that there are so many awesome believers in here, and that the things that are coming out of here are legit and real and aimed at your heart by people who love the Lord, you know.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. We've been through a lot, you know,
Yeah.
myself, my wife, our family. In some ways it's still going on, but
Sure.
it's been good when you look at it. But, you know, it's been a fight too. And the Lord has been there every step. And this is what happens, I think, with Christian as he goes along. He meets these things, good and bad, but he meets them head on, which is the great thing. He is not shrinking back. He's not hiding. He's trusting the Lord completely, makes some mistakes, gets down there, and it's like, okay, I went over the wall. I'm now in the giant's castle. He just threw me in down in here. That probably was a bad choice back there, you know. But he isn't like, okay, I'm done. That's it. We'll just hang here. He's like, no, we got to get out of here. We got to get back on that narrow path, which, you know. So I don't know. And again, that probably wasn't a great answer to your question.
No, it was great. I was reading this book a few months ago called Beyond Homelessness, and in the book, it talked about sort of 3 ways of thinking about home. And I think this is interesting because they say, and I'd never thought about it this way, they said there's the farmer, there's the wayfarer, and there's the pilgrim. And so the farmer is someone that knows home probably better than anyone. He knows his land. He's so comfortable, so familiar, you know, in one place and knows it backward and forward. But he's not really willing to leave that place. He's comfortable and he knows. And it's valuable, right? Because he tills the land, he takes care of it. The wayfarer doesn't believe there's a home. He's wandering, you know, he's never going to maybe get anywhere because he never believes he's going to get there. And then there's the pilgrim who is moving, it's on a journey, but knows that there's a home. You know, he knows he's going towards something. And they were saying that, you know, really that pilgrim sense is probably the best way to look at Christianity, because we always have to be moving. We can't stay comfortable. Like we have to, but we also have to know that there is a home. And sometimes you have to be, it doesn't mean you're always like, that's not literal. It means like the spiritual journey is always like a movement journey. It's not a sedentary journey. And I think Pilgrim's Progress was probably a huge way for Christians to understand even what a pilgrim is, because you know, despite Christian being in places and having all these experience, there's always a movement, and you know where he's going to the celestial city. He always knows that, you know.
And that is the most important. That thing is the most important thing.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think that's the beauty of this book and what you've done with it too. And I think personally, Phil, I think you've listened to the story so many times. It's like so ingrained in your heart. But I think you did a wonderful job of distilling the core for a kid or a parent to understand what is Pilgrim's Progress. Of course, you know, later you can read the full classic and there's a lot more to it. But I think what you did in distilling that, and even just giving kids that sense of like, you know, we are sinful, we carry that around, but that burden can be lifted. And what does that journey look like after that too? For a kid, I think there's so much to this book. It might be more simple in form, but there's so much nuance. And I think we don't give kids a lot of credit for how smart they are,
Amen to that. Yes,
how
absolutely.
much they can take in.
Yep.
Even new words, I think giving them the old words makes a kid imagine, oh, what other words do I need to learn? It's like, I think sometimes we lose that in trying to make things easier, that kids lose their curiosity, because even giving them an old word that maybe someone doesn't know, it makes you want to know, well, why did they use that? What does it mean?
Well, sure,
you know?
to me, things like that were fascinating when I was younger, and so I wanted to know what that meant. But I mean, I'm a simple creature at heart. I'm just a simple, small person. You know, I'm not super intelligent or anything like that. So for me, I guess to be able to see this story in this light is good for me. And I don't know, maybe that's just the skill I was given. I didn't ask for this. I actually had no intention of ever writing books. It's just the Lord pushed me backwards into this. It was nowhere on my radar.
Yeah.
So, it's great to hear. It's great to hear from you that I was able to get it down to that simple level. You just don't know. But I think for me, I am there. I'm,
No.
I'm about that high myself right there. So to get it into there is fairly easy for me because that's about where I am. But it definitely is my hope that you would come read this, like this, enjoy it, and go, I need to read that book because there is so much more in that book. We talked about that earlier today before we started about some of the things that had to be left out. And there is one big thing, and we won't talk about it because maybe we want to talk about that later, that I just did not want to leave out, but there just wasn't space. But Bunyan just did such a wonderful job. And for everybody out there, maybe we'll do something. If you can find that one thing, maybe we'll have some surprise for you down the road. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But
good. Well,
even I couldn't find it this morning, so it took me a while.
Well, before we wrap up, I think one thing I want to hear about too is just where your love of drawing came from, who some of your inspirations were, and just I think creativity is such a beautiful thing. I love art. I'm an art lover in all forms, and cartoons, painting, whatever, drawing. But tell me a little bit about that. Like, when did you learn to love to do art, and how did that start? And like maybe some of your creative influences too.
Okay. Well, I guess if you go way back, and we're talking about when I was a grade schooler, I can remember a babysitter that came along that my mom brought over, and I guess one of the things that he did just to keep me busy is he would sit and draw with me, and I became real interested in that, and so I just started to draw. I like to draw everything as a young person, and my real love, the thing that I intended to do was I love syndicated comic strips. I think we're losing them, but things like Peanuts and Garfield and stuff like that, that's what I was aiming at. Before I was a Christian, my previous career was a bar band, rock and roll, drug addict guitar player. Okay. And so I got saved, and the Lord pretty quickly showed me, okay, well, so we can't do that anymore. Okay, we're on this narrow road now, so we need to figure something else out. And it was at that point that I was like, I always like to draw. Maybe there's something I can do with that. So I kind of went back to that, and as I was walking down the road, I started doing some things. And I remember years ago, I wrote a letter to Charles Schulz, the author of Peanuts, the Peanuts comic strip. And I was working in a music store at that point. It was in the winter. It was snowing. No one was coming in. There was nothing to do. So I thought, I'm just going to write him a letter. And Snoopy has a cousin named Spike. He's real thin, and he's gotten even thinner than normal. So I just wrote him, what's the matter? You're not feeding him? Or don't you take care of him? And I sent the letter. I didn't think anything of it. But months later, I get a letter back from him. And he's drawn me a picture. And now, he can, Spike has like a big, like a beer belly or something. There's an arrow. It's like, I'm feeding him, take care of him. Just something struck me that he would take the time just to answer some, not a great letter, not a letter with a lot of introspection, some dumb letter from some dumb kid, and something stuck with me there. And I have an unnatural love of that comic strip, and I think for me, I was trying to do that and I went about 10 years with no success whatsoever. Well, not none. But things weren't working real great, and it was a syndicate editor that said to me, you should maybe try, we love this. This is great. We don't want to have anything to do with it. What about doing a book? And that's what got me pointed in that direction. But I would say definitely, oh gosh, there's so much, because I love Andrew Wyeth as a painter.
Me too.
So, my taste goes from there to people like Richard Scarry, who this book is sort of patterned after his beautiful, beautiful work and all those wonderful little pictures. And so that was really the motivation for the style in this. I just absolutely love that. I love all these guys from back in the day, Eric Carle, just the best of the best, people like that, Tommy DePaula. Maybe those are names, maybe not, but so all of these guys sort of inform, and just I love any kind of cool drawing. I was here in the art department at Whitaker and worked. There's some fabulous people here, got to do some amazing things. So I like all of that stuff. I love painting in any way, I have my favorites, I like Jackson Pollock.
Yeah.
I get it. A lot of people don't get it. I get it. I've had some stuff on my computer one time, and I had a very intelligent person come up to me that owned a company and said, "It looks like somebody threw up on the screen." It's like, okay, but that's the way it is with art. That's one of the things you have to learn as an art. You do it for the person who loves it and gets it. And,
And everyone has different tastes.
Everyone has different, and that's why there's so many different things,
But I can sincerely say it's a beautiful book. I can tell when you flip through the pages that, your heart was in every page, and you can see that. You know that from when you read a book to when you see a book and illustrations that you imbibe this message for how long. And really, it's one thing to illustrate, but it's another to know the core of the message. And like you said, translate that. How do you become, and so much of publishing is a translation, right? How do we connect people to a message?
Sure.
And I think, the beauty of this book is I think every generation, sometimes with the classics and things, need a new way to encounter that classic and a way to reinvent it and to renew the sense of why has Bunyan stayed around for all these years? Why do we still know Christian and his story of Pilgrim's Progress? Well, I think this book is another reason to say, we value what he did. It was groundbreaking when he did it. I'm sure people were like, what is this when it came out? Yeah. Especially if it was like the first novel, and then to be allegorical, and then to be all the things that he wanted it to be. But that's builds on, right? Like how many allegories from that, even Lewis, the Pilgrim's Regress, it's just build and build and build. And I think that's the beauty. So even this iteration is something new, a way to engage not only kids, but parents. And there's many Easter eggs in it of people you love. It's funny, it's fun, it's important, it's deep, it's all those things. And so I just love it. So it was wonderful to have you, Phil. Thank you for all of the hours you spent on it, because you can see it. It comes through the page.
Definitely the most fun that I've ever had doing anything in all these years. Just fabulous. I wish I could still be inside of it. I want to crawl back inside of it and just stay there.
You're still on the progress, right? You're still on your own Pilgrim's Progress. So
I got to get back in there somehow.
Good. Well, everyone check it out. Pilgrim's Progress, illustrated adventure for kids. And thank you, Phil. It was great to have you
Christine.
here.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Pages of Godlight. To find out more information about the books we feature in each episode and the authors behind them, visit pagesofgodlight.com. Let there be abundant light.